Hey Journeyers, it's Irene from Bay Wellness Coaching, and today I'm really excited to introduce Annie Ma Weaver. Annie is an amazing woman. She is a full-time worker, but also a mom who also received her UC Berkeley Haas School of Business MBA while working full-time. So I wanted to pick Annie's brain a little bit about how she manages to juggle so many things in life while maintaining like a certain level of sanity and working in a industry, tech, which is a very competitive industry and difficult from my understanding and experience. So Annie, thanks again for being on the show today.
Thanks, Irene, for having me.
Yeah, so just to kind of check in with you, how are things going in general? How are you doing today?
Uh, I'm doing all right, given the circumstances. As you mentioned, I am working full time with a toddler. My daughter just turned 16 months, and we are in a one-bedroom here in San Francisco. My husband and I are both working from home, so we have like overlapping phone calls throughout the day. And for a period of time between March and July, during shelter in place, our daycare was closed. So it was really like a circus. It was both me, my husband, my daughter, my dog, like all of us in this tiny space. So thankfully, our daycare reopened in July, and then since then we've kind of settled into what I call a new normal, where we are still working remotely, where we still have a toddler, but we are making it work. So I would say, like, overall, doing okay, and being grateful for the things that are working in our lives, and really thrilled to be here with you.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks again for being on the show. One of the things that I did want to talk about is your experience doing an MBA while still working full time. And
Mhm.
maybe you could share a little bit about your job. I know you work full time right now, and then you did, I think, it part time or weekend MBA at UC
Yes,
Berkeley.
the evening weekend MBA program at Haas. Um, I was working full time the whole time at Google. I've been at Google for about 10 and a half years. So for 3 of those years, I was doing the program. I was in the weekend cohort. So every Saturday I'd be in class from 8 or 9 until 5. And then I would do my group work, my homework in the evenings after I got home from work. And so it was very challenging to do it. But the reason that I did part-time is my husband and I really believe in an equal partnership in our marriage, in every aspect of our lives. And at the time when I was considering going to business school, my husband decided he wanted to launch his own venture. And so I was very excited for him, but it also meant that the opportunity cost of 2 incomes suddenly becoming zero, with him starting his company and me doing a full-time MBA, was not going to give him the risk appetite he needed to start his venture. And so, yeah, taking a step back from my own wanting to have the time of my life in a full-time MBA program, I realized that the part-time MBA would still give me the knowledge and the experience, but I could continue bringing home an income in the meantime and allow my husband the runway to start his company. And so that's what we did. I looked into part-time programs. Since we live here in San Francisco, there was really only 2 that I considered. One was at UC Berkeley and one was down at UCLA. And the Berkeley one was more accessible in terms of like commuting there rather than having to fly every week or every month. And so I ultimately went with that and had a really good time in the program. I do want to say that it was a great experience. I made really close friends, which I wasn't expecting because we're all like commuting and remote. And it ultimately was the right choice for me. But it came out of this like wanting to support my husband as he was starting a business, as he supported me in the past in my career too, and making the choice that made sense for our family.
Yeah, from my understanding, you also even graduated with honors at Haas, which is totally cool. For those who don't know, Annie also had, well, I went to UC Berkeley for my undergrad, where I got the same major, psychology and economics, that Annie had
Mhm.
gotten at Columbia while at undergrad. So that's to kind of give you all a little bit more context about Annie. I think you did end up graduating with honors at Haas for your MBA.
I did, yeah. I graduated top of my class. One of the top, I was not like the valedictorian or salutatorian, and I think both of them are amazing, but I was in the top 10. Um, I am a try hard. I mean, that's something that I've grown to love about myself. But like when I commit to doing something, I have to do it like 110%. So even though it was a part-time program and I had my full-time job and it's business school, which is supposed to be chill, I was like, you know what? I'm doing every reading. I'm showing up to every lecture prepared. Like I'm going to go the extra mile because I really was there to gain the knowledge of business, which I hadn't covered. Even in my economics undergrad, that was more academic. I wanted that practical knowledge. I wanted to really sink my teeth into it. And then I also wanted to show that I was serious to my professors and my fellow students about any endeavor that I set myself to. And so, yeah, it's like, I'm a little extra, and I like that about myself, but it is sometimes a little bit hard, I'm sure, to live with. Like my husband will say to me, like, did you have to do the optional reading? And I was like, you know what? It's not like the professor is trying to trick us. Like if it's there, it's probably for a reason. So yeah, I'm a little bit embarrassed, proud about this, that I graduated with honors because it came with like nothing. It just like, I think there was like a asterisk on the program. I think that was it. Otherwise, like there was no like actual, yeah.
Yeah, and you already had a job, so it was kind of more like a thing to learn a lot of stuff and not necessarily something that you needed in order to like advance your career.
Yeah, sorry about that. My my screensaver just came on and I just turned it off. Yeah, that's right. I already had my job at Google, and I stayed at Google during and after the MBA, so it wasn't even like a work-related thing. It was just personal pride. I am very much about like if I promise to do something, if I'm going to do something, I'm going to be all in. I want to give it my all because life is short. Our time is finite. Why bother doing something if you're going to half-ass it? Is my philosophy, my way of like approaching things, and I think you'll see that across like all the things that I do or try to do. So yeah, that was my attitude going into the program. So even though like again, no reward for it, I did graduate with honors.
Yeah, that's something that's like really that I really love about you and I think is really inspiring about you. It's like you don't half-ass something, you're like whole-assing it the whole time. And like
Yeah,
when you claim that you're known as like a try-hard, like I can really, really empathize with that because like I'm like all about learning and doing something and really like putting in so much effort. And oftentimes people are like, why are you even doing that? I'm like, I just need to learn and understand this. Like, this is just my
yeah,
personality. Like, I just can't help it. Like, it's something where I'm like, oh, that sounds interesting. I'm going to research so much about this thing and try to like maybe have a new tool that and I do think it's helpful because oftentimes I'll see like patterns. Like I feel like pattern recognition is something that I feel like I'm good at. And like I'll notice patterns in like this type of activity or this type of behavior and it'll be really applicable for like so many other things in life. And like I just think that's like a really cool thing that you're like, oh well, I'm gonna be a super nerd about this and I'm gonna own it and that's what I'm gonna do. So that's
yeah. I also
awesome.
didn't want my classmates and professors to like not know the true me. Like I'm really big about like bring your true self to the situation, like not hiding who you are. And I just wanted them to know that like if this were a Harry Potter story, I'm Hermione, and that's that. Like the kind of annoying know-it-all who tries to like absorb everything. Like that's who I am. And if they like that, that's great. We're gonna get along. And if they don't, that's okay. Like I'm not for everyone. But the people that I am for, I'm really, really for. So.
Yeah, and what did you think was some of the techniques or tools that you used to be able to balance working like a full-time job at a company like Google and still go to a MBA program at a school like Haas, which is both are known to be like very prestigious places to be working or very prestigious places to be attending school?
Um, yeah, so I would say like there were techniques, but I think it mostly came from a mindset of this is going to be a period of my time of my life where I'm just going to have to multitask. I'm going to not have a lot of relaxation, downtime, free time. And so I would just schedule or whenever I had a moment at work, like in between meetings, I would read my case studies, mark them up, work on problem sets. Like I was just integrating my work and my school all the time. I knew in the evenings, I didn't have time to Netflix and chill. I'd be like doing my group projects over video calls or working on those problem sets and case studies again. But I went in with this mentality that that's what I was signing up for. And that's also what I've approached being a parent. with that same kind of mindset. Like, it's going to be hard for these first couple of years of my daughter's life, and if I have subsequent children for their like newborn, infant, toddler years, it's just going to be hard. But it's well worth the investment. Like, for me, it's like visualizing the end point or the payoff helps me stay focused. And it's also acknowledging that, like, because it's hard, I won't have as much capacity to do other things that are important to me, like spending time with my family or friends or pursuing hobbies. But it doesn't mean that that's not a vital part of me. It's just that I'm putting that on hold, or I'm like consciously saying, like, this is not something that I can spend as much time on during this period of time when I'm committed to something else. So yeah, I would say it's more like an overall mindset, and the techniques that flow from that are multitasking. They are like prioritizing, saying no to things that I know that previously I would have enjoyed and still enjoy, but need to put on hold while I complete the task.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I can only imagine. I did attend a couple of classes while I was working full time, and it was just so
Mhm.
hard. Like it was just like, I think I was always like, oh, like I'm such a like nerd and I'm such a learner. Like I am working full time and I'm taking some classes online, or like I'm doing this and I'm doing that online. And I thought, for myself too, like maybe I want to do an evening MBA. And I started taking like some classes after work, and I was like, okay, I don't think this is for me, because now that I've experienced it, I'm like, okay, I don't think that would be something that would fit with like my lifestyle and like family and like all these other things that were going on. And like I think that was good for me to know. And it sounds like really good that when you committed to it, you knew like 100% that you were going to do it and do the whole thing. Yeah.
Yeah.
One thing that you
um,
touched, oh, sorry, continue.
oh, I was gonna say, like, I really admire how you're continuing to take education seriously and doing it along with your life. Because now that I have my daughter, I would not do my part-time MBA. Like, I just cannot see how it would fit in my life. And my classmates who had kids or were like expecting babies, like I had one classmate who gave birth and then came back to take a final, and I was like, what are you doing here? And she was like, what? It was just, I just had a baby. And I was like, okay. So like, I would say, like, look at your life circumstances and see if it fits. And the self-awareness you're showing is really key. And like, if you know that that's not the right fit for your life, good for you. Like, and then don't do it.
Yeah, yeah. One thing that I really admire about you is you mentioned a little bit about how you and your husband support each other as kind of seeing yourselves as equal partners. One thing that I did want to share with the listeners who might not be aware is your hyphenated last name. You're Annie Ma, M-A space Weaver with a dash in between, Weaver, W-E-A-V-E-R. And I think it's really cool and progressive that you've got a hyphenated last name. Do you want to share a little bit about how that came about? Like, I think it's a really great story and that people might be interested in listening.
Sure. This was actually featured also on a blog that I love called Cup of Joe, because in our, oh God, this is like a humble brag. We had a New York Times wedding announcement where we talked about how we were both hyphenating and changing our surnames, and it became a whole thing because people wanted to discuss like their belief system and how they wanted to manifest it in their names. So for us, we are, as I mentioned earlier, like very much about gender equality in our partnership. And early on in our relationship, we had a conversation about our surnames and how we both really loved our surnames and the history attached to them. Ma for me is, I was born in China. My birth name was Ma Youxi. And actually, when I immigrated here, I kept the Youxi as my legal name and Ma as my surname. And I'm very proud of being Chinese and American. And so I didn't want to give up that part of my identity. I said, there's a version of me that is Annie Weaver, that someone looks at that name and thinks like, oh, that's a white woman, like before they meet me, of course. And I didn't want that, like, I didn't want to be camouflaged or assimilate to that point. So my full name is Annie Youxi is my middle name, and then Ma Weaver, because I want someone when they see that name to be like, well, maybe she's half Asian, at least, to get that sense. So when we were talking about marriage, we very much wanted to signal to the world that gender equality was something important to us. And so it wasn't enough that, we changed our surnames to one or the other. We wanted them to be equal, and that hyphen is our equal bridge connecting the two names. So they are an equal standing, and visually they are connected. It was a hard choice for not my husband, but actually for his parents, my in-laws, whom I love so much, because he is the last male weaver in his family. And so we were essentially like letting that line die because we were going to pass on a different name to our kids. And so I did have to talk to his parents about it. And I went in with a negotiation tactic where you go with, and actually, if they're listening to this, I love you so much, Ardith and Reagan, and apologies for for telling you this so far after the fact. But I went in and was like, I want us to have the last name Ma. I was like, Ma is really important, and it has 5,000 years of history. Weaver is much shorter, and it was like, anglicized for Weber, for, after like, it's only been around for maybe a couple hundred years compared to thousands of years. So Ma is what I want. And they were like, oh, okay. And I was like, what do you think? And they're like, well, can't we at least have like some of Weaver? And I was like, so you're asking for a compromise? And they're like, yeah, could it be like Ma and Weaver? And I was like, I will think about it. And then later on, I was like, Ma Weaver is a great idea that you had. Thank you so much for this idea. And so I negotiated with them, but really it was kind of I hope you don't think that it's a bad trick, Ardith and Reagan, because I love being a Ma Weaver and I love having the Weaver in my name. But ultimately, we wanted a name that showed the world how much we cared about each other and each other's families and histories. And with our daughter, she has that hyphenated last name, but we've also talked about someday she might want to change her surname too, and we are fully supportive of that. Like if she marries another hyphenated surname, or if she just wants to take a different last name as her identity, like that's her choice. So yeah, thank you so much for asking that question. It is something that I've thought about a long time before we changed it. And then since then, I've talked about it with others who didn't realize that it was an option for in a heteronormative couple for the man to also change their names. So, we live in a patriarchy, so the default is that the woman will change the name in the heteronormative relationship. But I want to be a living example that that's not the case. And we could have also both been Ma. I was really pushing for that. I mean, it was semi-serious, but I was at one point saying like, Ma is like easy to pronounce, it's easy to spell, has all this like history, and it would be good for business in China for Jacob, who my husband, who also works in China. I was like, Mr. Ma, like it would be a familiar name. Clients there would feel very reassured about his Chinese ability and fluency with the culture. So I had like all these points about why Ma.
Yeah, that's really awesome. I've actually been doing a little bit of research, just anecdotal research, where I'm talking to different people who have like different last name orientations. And I really think the dash last name is really awesome. Like, I think it's a great way to kind of see both families as like two families joining together as one. And I really love the dash name option. Surprisingly, I've seen a few options where the man took the woman's last name when they got married because of maybe like family history or trauma related to that last name. And they felt like, okay, well, I don't really want to have the same last name as these people who like may have abused me and whatnot. And so I've actually seen some cases of that, some cases where they just took it because they thought it sounded better. And yeah, even now today, like it's so common for women to take the man's last name like 100%, and or men even being offended if the woman doesn't want to take their last name, even though there's so many benefits of keeping your own last name for like legal reasons, like business presence, or people have come to know you if you're somebody, a figurehead in your industry, to have like your own name that you've been using for like 20, 30 years, 40 years maybe, and having to like rebrand yourself. So I think it's awesome that you and your husband have such a good like relationship and you're both so supportive of each other. And that's like truly when people can support each other with no qualms or issues of wondering like, oh, what's society going to think of this? Yeah, that's awesome. And then maybe you could share a little bit about your family planning experience, like being someone who's also very career driven and career minded. Like, how did you kind of decide when to have a baby? Because it's kind of, I do talk to a lot of women. As a wellness coach, I talk to a lot of people and kind of talking through different life projects or life challenges. And like, I think childcare and like when to have children is a really big thing. I've talked to a lot of people who've like frozen their eggs or doing IVF now because it's been a little bit too late for them and they need to like get additional assistance. Like, at what point did you kind of decide like this is when I want to have a baby?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I think it's such a personal choice for each your clients and each person who's considering having a family. For me, one of the things that I wanted to figure out was who I was as an adult before I wanted to take care of a child. And so my husband and I met in college. We met when we were 18, 19, like very young, and we started dating. And so we got married when we were 24, which sounds really young, but for us at that point, we had already been together for about 6 years, and it felt like the right next step. But after we got married, we got a lot of pressure from not just family, but friends, and even like coworkers of mine would be like, "Oh, you're married, like when are you having a child?" And I used to get really like my back up about this, is they're like, "How dare you, why are you asking me?" But I realized it was because I was working through my own internal, like, not turmoil, but like my own internal orientation about what it meant to be married and then not have children. Because I come from a Chinese culture where it's very much, women are responsible for the domestic sphere. They're expected to marry young and have children young. And my parents also, shared with me at times, like, you've been married for a while now, why don't you have kids? So the answer I came up with was that I wasn't ready to be an authority figure, a caretaker for another human being until I had figured out some really fundamental things about myself. What were my values? What was my profession? What was my impact to the world, or at least like what I wanted that impact to be. And so I wanted to spend my 20s exploring that. And so even though we were married at 24, we spent 7-8 years child-free, and they were wonderful. We spent that time, other-oriented. We spent that time traveling, getting my MBA, my husband starting his company. We did a lot of things outside of the home during that time when we were still growing and developing as people. And then in my 30s, I started to feel more settled into who I was, more comfortable. And that also was what I was getting at earlier when I was like, I am for some people, I'm not for others, that's okay. Like, you kind of get to a point when you're, hopefully, like, you get to this point in your 30s when you're like, fuck it, like, if you don't like me, whatever, like, this is who I am. And like, hopefully that person that you are is a good person, and you're like growing and developing, but like, you get to a point where you know yourself and you're comfortable. And I was getting to that point in my 30s where I felt like, okay, I think that I'm ready to be a parent. And then probably the last bit of timing, like give or take 6 months, was related to performance reviews at Google. So I had, I was going up for a promotion, and I thought, like, if I get this promotion, I have kind of a breather in the next performance cycle where I could be more internally focused, or like in the work-life balance sense, more life focused. And so, and if I don't get this promotion, I'll try again in 6 months, and then try then to have a child. And so I was fortunate to get the promotion, and right after, Jacob and I started trying to have a child. So I would say, like, it was a combination of like wanting to grow up in the sense of like being comfortable in my skin, knowing who I was, and then in the last like couple months of timing, it was trying to be strategic about my career ambitions / aspirations. It's something that a lot of women have to contend with in their 30s, because these are our fertile years, 30s into 40s now, but also the years where many of us are trying to make the equivalent of partner at our firms, where our career is really taking off. So it's hard to thread that needle to both be able to have biological children and continue to ascend in our professional lives. And so I'm trying to do that dance. I'm trying to figure out, like, okay, performance cycle ended, now I can like try for a child, and then for our next child I'll probably do the same of like, let me go for promo, and if I get it, then I'll try for a baby. If not, I'll wait another 6 months. Yeah, I'm not saying that everybody has to do it this way, but for me, and like the way that I think, I like to plan ahead. And so I've been trying to fit all the pieces of my life together, and also like start from like being a whole person, like knowing that I'm ready to take care of somebody else because I've taken care of myself. So yeah, did that answer your question?
Yeah, it sounds like you really had to balance out timelines in terms of work too. And for those of you who don't know, the performance review cycle at Google is a very big momentous. It kind of determines like whether you'll be promoted, your pay range, like all these other, like whether you can, I guess, transfer to jobs later after you get your promo based off of like what level you are. So it's like a whole thing. And actually I had heard some people say like people even time when they have a baby so they can get into the Google daycare system with like the lottery system. It's like, oh, well,
Yeah.
I'm going to try for a baby at this point because then when I have it, I'll be first in line in the lottery system if I have my baby on time. But maybe I'll give myself a little bit more time so I can be first in line for, or at least like 10th or 12th in line, because if my baby comes early, then I won't be. I'm just like, that's
I did
amazing.
not even try for the daycare. I was like, you know what? This daycare is so competitive and it's so far out, as you were alluding to, like so many months or years ahead. I was like, there's no way. And it's just another stressor. So I
Mm.
didn't even try.
Did you do any like research with other people trying to figure out like how you decided to do that timeline, or did it kind of just you and Jacob discussing, or like did you kind of get some counsel from other colleagues of yours who might have done something similar? Like how did you kind of figure out that process of like when to do what? Like were there any resources or books or things that you thought were really helpful in that decision?
Ooh, great question. So I did read a lot of books, mainly about older women who are already like far along in their careers, kind of like the Sheryl Sandbergs of the world, who had children, or Susan Woznicki, who talk like briefly in their autobiographical pieces about how they balance their children and their careers and the timing of it. So I took some clues from there, but mostly it was from talking with women in my field, and also just friends about what they were seeing and wanting to do in terms of having kids and balancing that with work. There was one woman that I spoke to whose husband's actually close friends with Jacob, and we were at a dinner, and I was like, this was before I was pregnant. I was like, I just don't know how to do this. I was like really frozen in this moment. And she was pregnant with her second at that point, and she her company had just gotten acquired. She was the CEO and founder, and she was thinking of pivoting to VC from the acquihire because she didn't want to be part of this large corporation. And I'm not going to share her name because I want to maintain her privacy. But we had dinner together, and she was telling me, like, you know, it's actually not so bad, the first child, and you know, now I'm going to have my second with work, because you make it a priority to do the things that matter at work and that matter to your child, and it will actually enhance your capabilities. She was like, a lot of people say that mommy brain is this thing where like you get a fog and you're not able, and she was like, for me, mommy brain is like a superpower, because now I just cut through the bullshit. I'm like, this is the thing that matters. Like, don't tell me all this other stuff. I don't have time, but I'm also like laser focused. And she made it sound like just like it was no big deal, and it was also wonderful, like a superpower. And after she spoke to me, I came home from that dinner and talked to Jacob and was like, you know what, I'm not scared anymore. Like, I'm ready, I think, to move forward with our plan of having a baby. And he was like, oh. And so I think like ultimately what unlocked it for me was just talking to someone who's like a few years ahead. And I hope I can give this to your viewers too. Like, it is not as terrible a blow as people have maybe told you in popular media or popular culture. It actually, in many ways, has enhanced my abilities at work, because I'm no longer willing to take a lot of things that before I think subconsciously or unconsciously I just assumed I had to. Like, I have to listen to preambles or people mansplaining or like have a lot of like useless meetings. But now that I have a human being that I'm responsible for, it's like, I can't. That's not useful. That's not working for me. And it also has deepened my connections with my team members, my partners, my customers, because many people are parents, especially now in the pandemic. We're all trying to, we working parents are trying to support our loved ones, our children, but also trying to fulfill our job responsibilities. And that is such a like human experience that you can connect to people on. And I wouldn't have had that without having my daughter. So I would say like the timing, part of it was like I did research, but part of it was just seeing someone living that example of it being okay, of her like actually thriving after having kids, that made me like less afraid. And now I'm doing it, and it's mostly okay. I mean, it's, you know, you don't sleep as well, and all of my clothes have like random fluids on them from my daughter, but it's okay.
Yeah, that's really awesome. It's awesome that you were able to have this network of people to talk to. I think that's really important. And that's something that I always stress to people, like wellness is something that has so many facets to it, whether it's like, you know, social support or like exercise. There's just so many things, like getting enough sleep, like fueling your body with good food. Like there's so many different things, but I think social support can be so helpful in like building people's confidence, whether it's like doing something you could already do, but just hearing them tell you like you can do it and having that external person just encouraging you to get it done. That's like really, really amazing. And what you mentioned kind of reminds me a little bit of Dear Girls by Ali Wong. It's a book that she wrote, and I just finished reading it this year. I think it came out somewhat recently, but she talks a lot about how her husband, who is a Harvard MBA, is like so supportive, and he ends up being a house husband and taking care of the girls. And this book is just about her sharing stories of words of wisdom basically to her daughters. And she talks about how hard it was to like be pregnant and do all these shows, and like men would even say like, oh, you're just being famous now because you're pregnant and you can use that, and we don't have like a tool to use. And like she does, like they have no idea all the struggle and like how nauseous you can be and like all these other issues. And I thought that was a really good book. And I think actually in the book she also talks about having a miscarriage, and I think that's something that is talked about so much more commonly now. Like even in Michelle Obama's book she talks about like having a miscarriage. And like I think it's good that nowadays people are a lot more open about different things and more willing to share, even to like a broader audience, like of people who, like, say you read Sheryl Sandberg's book and you found some really useful tools out of it, or at least got some guidance or tips. And I think it's really cool nowadays. We live in an age where it's so easy to access information from other people, but also still relying and tapping into your own personal network of people who you know are like supportive of you. So that's really awesome. um, when you talk a little bit about like being a working mom, like what are some of the things that you do to help maintain your own sanity with a really high stress job? You've got a baby at home, you also have a really cute dog. Like that sounds like a lot to juggle. And like what are some of the things that you do to help keep yourself in like a good mental state?
Yeah, well, thank you so much for saying that I'm in a good mental state. Sometimes it feels very like chaotic up here, but I would say the first thing that I do is fitness for me, as for you, is a really important priority, and so I always make time for a daily workout. Now that we're all at home, what that means is, you know, online classes through YouTube. There are a lot of free workouts out there. I actually created a lockdown workouts playlist that I've shared with people. And it's like I'm adding to it constantly of new YouTubers I'm discovering. And I also have a local studio called Burn Pilates that I love so much. I've been with them since 2017, and they've now transitioned to fully virtual. So I do their Burn Pilates classes two, 3 times a week. And it's a combination of HIIT and weights and Pilates. And I seek out that mix also in my YouTube workouts. So I make sure to get a sweat on every morning, no matter what. You know, I wake up earlier maybe than I need to, just to get that in and make sure that I'm then ready for the day. Afterwards, I shower, like make breakfast for the family, and then like roll into my day. But yeah, I would say that's probably the most consistent thing I'm doing to maintain sanity. And then also just trying to work-life integration rather than work-life balance. So anytime that I have a break between meetings, I try to get something done that I know needs to get done. Last night's a great example. I was making this chicken and rice dish for dinner, and I had a bunch of evening calls. And so I chopped the vegetables for the dish like after one call, and during another call, I put the dish into the oven. And then during the third call, I put it to just vocal or audio, and I turned off my video because I was actually ladling the food into bowls and like moving it to the table. So I was just doing it around my meetings because I knew that, we've got to eat dinner. I wanted to make this meal, but I also needed to be available for my team and for these evening calls. At Google, I'm responsible for a global remit, and so I cover Europe, the US, and APAC, and Asia Pacific. Not every day, thankfully, but most days. And so I start with really early meetings. I transition throughout the, I have meetings throughout the day, and then I have evening meetings with Asia Pacific. And so I just try to keep on top of what I need to do and kind of weave it in and out. And then I'm open with my team that I am a working mom, that there's going to be screams from my daughter or my dog coming into the video, that sometimes I'll need to go to just audio. I won't be able to turn on video because I'm doing something else in the background. And my team has been super supportive. Many of them are in similar situations. And one silver lining of the pandemic is just getting to see more of that personal side of people's lives, like getting to meet their kids and their partners and seeing their animals, their dogs and cats. Like, it's a highlight for me every time it happens. And people will apologize, but I think we've gotten to the point where people stop apologizing because that's just where we are. That's our lives. And it's no longer like embarrassing or weird that you have other people in your home with you. And when you're on these like artificial video conversations, the organic life is going to happen around you. Yeah, so I thank you so much for saying that I seem balanced. It feels like a whirlwind, but yeah, I definitely the daily workout that has helped so much. It was really hard to get weights. I had to use milk jugs for a while because like they were sold out everywhere. So if you use gallon jugs, they're about 8 pounds. Half-gallon jugs are about 4 pounds. My daughter drinks milk all the time, so I had a ready supply. That's what I was using for weights. Sometimes I squat with her too. She's a great weight. She's about 30 pounds. So yeah.
Gosh, yeah. Man, that's really good that you're able to balance everything with people at home, and even just like the fact that your coworkers know that you're doing things and that you might turn off your video. Like, I think sometimes people are like, oh, if the video's not on, are they paying attention? And there's like, it's good that you've kind of come to this agreement where like sometimes you can have your video on when you can, and sometimes you can't when it's off and you're actually busy with something else, but still listening at the same time.
Yeah.
In terms of kind of raising a baby here in the Bay Area, it's really, really expensive. For people who aren't as familiar with the area, it's one of the most expensive places in the United States to live. Like, what do you think are some of the big challenges or benefits, maybe, if there are any, of raising a baby in San Francisco?
Yeah, I definitely agree with you that San Francisco is not a child-friendly place. I think I read a statistic that we have like the lowest children or percentage of children as a percentage of the overall population of any major metropolitan in the US. And another statistic was that there are more dogs than children under 5 in San Francisco. So it's dog friendly, and we got our dog first, and like people here love dogs, restaurants welcome dogs, you can bring dogs into the grocery. So by having our dog first, I think we got the wrong impression about having dependents in San Francisco. Some of the things that are challenges are, we live in a walk-up. We don't have an elevator. We have a toddler who walks very slowly, and so we have to carry her up and down the stairs, or stroller up and down the stairs, like multiple times a day. That's, thankfully we're able-bodied, but that is like a challenge. We also, we pay for childcare. I love our daycare. It's wonderful, but it is very expensive relative to what you would pay in other parts of the US. And we are fortunate to be able to afford it, but it definitely is like, I'm not in savings mode right now. I'm in spending mode to take care of my child. And in exchange, I have some time where I can focus on the work that generates the money that I give straight back to the daycare, or give to the daycare. The benefits, I think, are, California in general is just a wonderful place to grow up. It's multicultural. The weather is amazing. It's proximity to Asia. My daughter goes to a daycare where they speak Mandarin to her. That's a language that I grew up speaking, and she is actually more comfortable speaking Mandarin with us than English. And that's something I think that's unique to being in California, definitely San Francisco, Los Angeles as well, other cities where you can have a first language that isn't English. It could be Spanish, it could be Chinese, and that's not considered unusual. And I also love just the history of San Francisco. Is one of the reasons that I was drawn out here, of protest culture, of gender equality, of like sexual equality, LGBTQIA rights. Like, it was something that I wanted to steep my family in. And I still think it's here, like, even though there's all these, the rumors of San Francisco going bust or like no longer being desirable, I think are exaggerated. I think we're going to recover from the pandemic dip in our, average rental costs and like housing prices, because you're always going to have those things I listed. You're always going to have like the amazing weather, the proximity to Asia, the like multicultural communities, the history of equal rights and social justice. So yeah, even though it's like a pain in the butt for example, a lot of restaurants here don't have changing tables. So I've changed my daughter so many times on the ground in a bathroom stall, like with someone's feet like right next to us. And I'm like, yeah, I know, lady. I know there's like a poopy diaper right next to you. I have no other place to put her. So yeah, it's a challenge, but it's also, I think it's similar to other people who have chosen like urban places to raise their children, like be it Chicago or Raleigh or Austin or New York. Like you choose it for all of the like cultural and social economic and the vibrancy of it, those benefits, and then you take the annoyances on the chin. You're like, you're not going to be able to easily fit your stroller into restaurants or find a place to change your baby. Maybe some people are annoyed at you when you walk into a place because your child is crying and there's not that many children. I mean, those things will happen, but then I think about all the benefits of living here and I'm like, oh yeah, like I'm so glad we're here.
Yeah, it's really interesting what you said about changing tables. I think it's something where a lot of women kind of are upset at times when there's no changing table in the men's restroom, but there is one in the women's restroom, because it's kind of implied like, oh, women have to be the ones to change a baby's diaper. And what about like a single dad? What about a family where there is a man and a woman, but they believe in equality and they take turns?
Right. Or what about a like gay couple where like both dads are right there, they're ready to change, but exactly.
But in San Francisco, I guess the issue is like there's just no changing table, so there's equality.
There's equality in a different way. It's like both of you can deal with a poopy diaper on the ground, and it's like, oh, thank you. Yeah, I mean, actually on that note, something that we talked about with Jacob's dad is that he never changed a diaper. And I don't think my dad did either, because in earlier generations, the dad was just not expected to like do these tasks that were seen as women's work, like feeding the baby, changing the baby, like bathing the baby, etc. And one of the things that Jacob and I talked about was like, if we're both 100% the parent of this child, then we do 100% of the duties. Like we are both capable. We have like all our fingers and toes, and like they're not hard tasks. They're just repetitive and they're kind of annoying, but like we can each do them. And so from early on, we would take turns. I mean, other than like breastfeeding and pumping, which was my domain for biological reasons, Jacob really did more than his share, especially when I was healing from childbirth and doing the breastfeeding and pumping. He would just be there to do all these things. And he and his dad had a conversation early on where his dad was like, wow, you're doing a lot. And he was like, yeah, of course. And then his dad was like, like kind of reflecting back on his fatherhood. And it was a different time. Like my dad also had similar experiences where he was just not, there was not that expectation that he would do things that were seen as women's work.
Mm-hmm. That's awesome. And I think it's very fortunate for the both of you that you'll be able to lead this example on for any children that you have additionally besides your current child, like to show them these healthy relationships where we don't have to feel bound by societal standards of like, oh, a man needs to do this and a woman needs to do this. Like, I think it's awesome. And I think that's something you can definitely see a lot here in the Bay Area versus like a lot of other places. I think there's still that idea like, oh, well, woman has to do most of the child raising or almost all of the child raising. And nowadays with more and more women working, like I think that is almost absolutely insane that like a woman needs to do all of the work at home and all of the work from
the
work.
Second shift. Exactly. Like there's no room for someone to work full-time and take care of children full-time for them to also take care of themselves. Like there's just no space or time for that. And you need to take care of yourself because that's how you sustain your performance over time. That expectation is so ridiculous that we put on women. And whenever I hear the phrase having it all, I get so mad because it's like, I don't want to have it all. I want to have like the bare minimum, or have it some. I want some of, like, I don't want to be the one who's expected to carry it all on my shoulders just because I happen to have, you know, a uterus and ovaries. And that was not something I had control over or chose either. So yeah, I think it speaks to both like the value system here in the Bay Area and also of our generation, that we are very seriously thinking about how we split things that previously were very gender normy, like all of this is for women, all of this for men. Like now we're like, hey, what if we looked at it holistically and actually divided it up equally, or by preference or comparative advantage, to go to our econ backgrounds. It's like by who does a better job, or like what we can barter and trade across. You know, it's more enlightened now. I think we still have room to grow. I think there's still like a lot of equality to be gained ahead. But I'm really heartened by what I'm seeing in our generation, because like back to like with my husband and his dad, like there's not the assumption that like, oh, you're the dad, you don't have to do anything.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I think that's like one of the coolest things about your relationship. Like you have such a great supportive relationship where you're both supporting each other towards your goals. Like at this time when your husband is starting a new venture, you kind of took on additional work to go to school, kind of forego the full-time MBA experience of, you know, networking madness to work
Yeah.
full-time and go to school, which I think is just such a difficult thing for anyone to accomplish. Like, it's really hard. Yeah, so that's amazing. And it's just really great that you have such a good relationship that you can support each other. Do you have any maybe words of wisdom or final things you want to talk about in terms of like women who feel like it's really hard to manage both, like, or maybe just like manage the expectations of like a husband who might think like, oh, that's not really my work. Like, what do you think made it so that you and your husband could have such a good relationship where you both kind of see each other as equals, as opposed to like maybe like a man who feels like, oh, well, you're kind of the one who needs to do all this work?
Um, Hi. I realize my husband's in the other room, so you can hear all of these good things being said about him, which are true, and I really appreciate him. I think my final words are, you know your worth, and know that you are worth someone who will love and support you fully as you are. And if you have ambitions to be, you know, whatever profession you're choosing, like you want to be like an actor, or you want to be a writer, or, you know, in tech you want to be like a founder, be clear about that with your partner and see if they are ready to support you, or if they are willing to support you. And if they're not, like, there are a lot of people out there, and I really believe that, you know, in the theory of multiple soulmates, like I don't think there's just one perfect match for you. I think there are a lot of people out there, and I think you shouldn't accept less than what you deserve. And what you deserve is someone who will support your full self, even if your full self is someone who is incredibly demanding. And again, talking about like heterosexual relationships, which is my personal lived experience, I have found that it takes a very strong man to support a strong woman. And I see this example in my life, and also, you know, with like Barack and Michelle Obama. It really takes someone who believes in themselves, who is confident in themselves, who doesn't have that toxic masculinity thing going on where they have to be, you know, a man in order to like be with a woman. It takes a certain amount of like self-awareness and flexibility, and like, and I like to think that you will know it when you see it, and you also know it when you see yourself. So I think a lot of it comes from being comfortable with who you are, loving who you are, and then knowing that that person deserves somebody who compliments and lifts them up. I'm definitely not an expert in relationships. I've only been in a few, and I was very fortunate to meet Jacob in college. But early on, you know, I said to him, like, in declarative statements, like, I want to do this, I want to accomplish this, like, I want to be, and I said, like, I want to be the breadwinner, and I am for our household. You know, I want to be the person who's like out in front doing things. Like, I want to travel for my work. I want to, you know, I want to be a leader, and that will take me away from our home. But it's not that I don't want to have a home or family with you. It's just those facets of my identity are not subservient to my professional ambitions. And so, yeah, I would say, like, if I have any advice, it's just, know and love yourself, and then demand nothing less from your partner. And I know you have a very supportive partner as well, so I'm preaching to the choir. But yeah, when you meet that person, you'll know, and you will both be better for it. Yeah, and then just always understanding that there's someone better out there if the person you're with is making you settle.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I've read both in terms of like psychological studies as well as kind of anecdotal evidence that I've seen in real life. Like everyone I know who's very successful, I feel like oftentimes they have a supportive partner who
Yeah.
is appreciative of them and they're also mutually appreciative of. And it doesn't have to be like, you have to put it on social media or whatever. Like you can have a really, really supportive partner and be, very low key about it. Like everyone I know who's like seems to be the happiest person that I know is like in a successful relationship, then followed by people who are single, then followed by people who are in an unhappy relationship because like that's
Uh,
something that could really drag you down. Like if you're unhappy about your relationship like every single day, that is really tiring. Like, and so like if people are really like unhappy in a relationship, it's probably better for both of you to like be separated. And I think you'll both like individually be happier and there'll be a greater general happiness if you're like single and content. And then
yeah.
like the best is finding someone who supports you and you support them and you're there for each other and like you're each other's biggest fan and like biggest supporter and somebody to like bounce off ideas on and like kind of encourage you to like reach your goals. So I think that's something that I feel like your relationship really exemplifies. And I was like, yeah, I think this is really cool. And like, especially to be in like a heteronormative relationship and have like actual equality in a relationship, I think is really cool. Yeah, thanks
Yeah.
again, Annie. Do you have any other things you want to share or we'll just wrap it up here?
Um, I did want to talk briefly about what I do for work because this is probably something that not all of your audience will be interested in, but I cover high performance computing for Google Cloud, or HPC. And so if you want to look me up on LinkedIn, it's Annie Ma Weaver. If you want to talk to me about HPC, I actually work with HPC for Women group, where we are trying to increase diversity for HPC. And I also mentor people who are recently out of college. And so if those are things that appeal to you or you want to talk to me about them, feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. And I would love to have that conversation with you.
Yeah, I think you mentioned that you're also involved in some women's groups at work.
Yes, yeah, I'm involved at Women at Google, which is a employee resource group that we have for women employees. I'm also an active alumni mentor for the Columbia College Women's Group. And I also am active with the Asian Googlers Network, where I'm a mentor for women, junior women who are part of the Asian Googler Network. So yeah, I try to give back in ways that help others. Going back to the example of being an example for others, I try to be someone that can show them, don't be afraid of taking the next step or going to the next stage. Here's my imperfect lived experience, and take from it what you will, and hopefully that motivates you or unblocks you, stops you from being afraid. I think fear holds a lot of us back, and we already have the potential inside. We just need to let go of that fear and take that next step.
Yeah, that's awesome. Like, I really think mentorship is great. Like, I've been doing mentoring for a really, really long time in the LGBT community. I've been out for, I don't know, it's like 15 years maybe, but it's been a long time. And like, especially if you're part of a minority group, I think it's really, you can feel really alone, especially in tech as a woman, especially a woman in a more technical role. Like, there's just not as many people out there. So definitely if anyone's listening, try to find a mentor, like reach out to your employee resource groups, reach out to like people who are maybe a little bit further on in their career. And I think having a mentor who like believes in you and you can kind of see them as an example of someone who is able to do it, I think is really great. Yeah. So thanks for sharing your experiences, giving back to the community, being a mentor yourself. Well, just to wrap it up, as always, we're signing off. Deep breath in together. Deep breath out. Have a good rest of your day, everyone. Take care.